You guys could provide that world-class service. There could be so many things that happen if you get the darn data. Automations could trigger to you, to the client, automatically based off policy renewal, based on cash value changes, based on address changes, whatever. If that data is flowing into your CRM or your database automatically, there's so much you can do. Not only that, it trickles down to the client. The client no longer has to call you or wait. The client no longer has to call the carrier and get confused and then call you and get confused, and then you have to go to your MGA, etc. It's all in your database at your fingertips. You don't have to worry, which is huge. And so what this means for the industry, if it starts moving, is not only are you going to provide better service, you're also going to sell more. The carriers are going to make more. Clients will be happier. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of Advisor Tech Trends. My name is Massimo, if you don't know by now, and today we're going to delve into some industry news. I was actually at a really interesting conference last week called CLHIA. I'll talk a little bit more about that, and I'll talk about what that means for you as an advisor. So, as always, please like, comment, subscribe. I love hearing from you guys, and let's get into it. Okay, so what is CLHIA? Funny enough, I think most advisors don't know what this is. So CLHIA is an organization that was started almost 20 years ago, actually more than 20 years ago, 24 years or something like that. And they were started to bridge the gap between carriers and advisors as it relates to data. And so they are kind of a lobbying organization, or an organization that gathers standards and tries to establish standards so that carriers can follow them and advisors or technologies can consume them. And so think of it like this. The carrier has all kinds of data about your clients, the renewal date, basically everything about the policy, but they don't know how to send it to the software you use. And so there's a middle player called CLHIA that says, okay, you should send it in this format, first name like this, last name like this, email like this. And they define that standard or define that blueprint. And they give it to the carrier and say, do it like this. And so that's kind of how CLHIA started. They started as this middleman between the carrier and the advisor or technology, and they would actually define what are called standards. And so this started many decades ago, a couple decades ago. And they just started off by introducing carriers and technology. Then they started by defining some standards, kind of using standards from the US called Accord forms. Used that as a template, went to the carriers and said, you should do it this way. And it kind of steamrolled. And so I've been going to this event for the last 3 years. And this year was different. It definitely had a different vibe. And I think it's relevant for this podcast because I think we're on the cusp of some really, really cool stuff. And so for the longest time, for about 10 years now, what they have been working on is just getting the carriers to send book of business feeds, as they call it. And so that is, well, it's kind of in the name, but all of your business that the carrier has, they will send to your MGA once per week. And that will be in a format that CLHIA defines. First name like this, last name like that, etc. And so that took a long time to get off the ground. And now that is officially off the ground and has been for a number of years. And that's how your MGAs use Blue Sun or other tools like that, because the carriers are sending the book of business to tools like Blue Sun, and Blue Sun is ingesting it and then showing it to you, the advisor. Just about every carrier in Canada is on there. I think as of 2, maybe 3 years ago, every carrier got on that, which is awesome. Now, the shift over the last couple of years has been, okay, can we get that quicker? Can we get that via API? Instead of waiting for a week, can we go, me as the software vendor, can the carrier give me an API document that says, okay, this is all the stuff you can go get, first name, last name, email. Can I go get it from the carrier? And so that's called an API. And so that's been the thing that's been in the works. And last year when I went to the event, they were talking about APIs, but they weren't there yet. And as of this year, they actually have it with Avari. So that's the first person that has produced an API. So now you can go get data from Avari with the push of a button. So you can see where this is going, and it's really exciting. And so there were a couple themes that I saw at this event that are relevant to advisors. Number one is what I just talked about. APIs are finally shipping. So what that means for you is very soon, within the next couple of years, almost all the carriers are going to start jumping on board with this API train. What that means is the tech tools that you use are going to be able to push a button and the data will be able to come into the tech tool or maybe automatically. And so that's a huge step. Now, obviously, there's massive challenges. The carriers were there. They were getting up on stage. This costs them a lot of money to build these APIs and to build this data lake, as they call it, because as you know, many of these carriers have acquired businesses in the past. There's all kinds of data everywhere. So they got to assemble it all into one place, then define a protocol so that I or the software can go get it. And so we're not there with all the carriers. Avari's kind of a smaller one that was able to move quickly, but it's showing light at the end of the tunnel. And so that was something new. There hadn't been anything new with CLHIA in a number of years. And so the fact that one carrier has proven that APIs work, has proven it in the market, and it is live is huge. And there were hundreds of people hitting that API a day. And so that shows that people are actually using it, people being advisors. So that's really exciting. The second thing that I saw was carriers are finally aligning. In the previous years that I have been there, the carriers would get up on stage and the MGAs would get up on stage, and it would almost be combative in many ways, where the carriers would say, well, we can give you our data, but what are you going to do with it? And the MGAs would be like, well, we don't know yet, but give us the data and we'll figure it out. And so there was this kind of game of chicken going on, seeing who would make the first move. And the reality is, at the end of the day, the consumer suffers because they want to know what product they have. They'd probably buy more product if this was all figured out. So we don't have to get into all of that. But the main thing is, in previous years, I saw almost a combative or argumentative relationship between the carriers and the MGAs at this conference. That was different this year. There were multiple carriers there, the big ones like Canada Life and others, that actually stood up and said, listen, we've had meetings with the other carriers. We've had meetings with CLHIA. We're all on the same page that this needs to happen. The biggest thing they were trying to figure out now is kind of the third point, or the third thing I noticed while I was there. So one of the carriers got up there on stage and said, okay, we all agree that this needs to happen, and we've gotten approval to make it happen. And the CRM softwares and the vendors have insurance and the proper technology to make this happen. But now we're looking at you, the advisor. Are you cool with this happening? And also, do you have risk mitigation? Do you have insurance to allow this? Because when you think of it from the carrier's point of view, the carrier is basically opening up the pipes to their data. So they're sending the data to the software, and the software has to put their neck on the line and say, we put everything in place so we don't get hacked. And then there's one level deeper. Now that the advisor is using that data, the advisor has to put their neck on the line, being like, we're doing everything in our power to make sure we don't get hacked. And so that's kind of the last piece of the puzzle that I noticed there. And that wasn't combative, but it was kind of like, okay, advisor, we're now at the point where we can give the data. What are you going to do to make us feel good about that? And so that was an interesting change, because for a while, the advisors were just saying, what the heck? I have no data. And I think this all ties into the third point that I noticed there was, this was the first time I had seen, and I talked to some other people who have been on the CLHIA board in the past for like 10 plus years. There were actually 3 very high performing advisors that were brought there and were actually put on stage. And these advisors were basically given 40 minutes to complain. And the advisors were kind of like, listen, orphaned books of business, we can't do anything with because we don't have data. We have to double entry all the time. We have to call you guys 3 or 4 times just to get information about a policy. We can't get any documentation, et cetera. And so the advisors were actually given a voice. And it wasn't just like trash talking. It was actually actionable feedback and relevant feedback. And I thought that was really interesting, because it showed that CLHIA and the industry in general is at a point where they can kind of say, okay, these guys are feeling it. And they wouldn't just say these guys are feeling it if there was no solution in sight or we weren't close. And so all in all, like the combination of advisors getting up on stage saying, listen, we're struggling without data. We cannot, I think the analogy that was used is, we want to provide a first-class, world-class experience. And when you think of very fancy hotels, they focus a lot on getting bathtubs that fill up within minutes. so that when you want a bath, if you're at a fancy hotel, it'll be full in minutes. And so that's like a conscious decision and a very expensive bathtub. These guys, these advisors want to give that to their clients. But the problem is they can't get the damn water. And so that was the analogy that was used. And I think that was really interesting where the carriers are aligned that, yes, we want to have nice baths for your clients too. We want to give you the water. The advisors were allowed to come and actually say that, which, like I said, shows me that the industry, I think, is ready for a bit of a shakeup. And all the tech's ready. Like, it's there. It's just everyone's got to get through the bureaucratic and the insurance kind of hurdles. And the last piece is we've proven it. APIs actually shipped this year, which had never been done before. And so with this combination, I think in coming years, it's going to change a lot. And I think we're on the cusp of some data coming in. There's some light at the end of the tunnel. It's exciting for me because obviously I run a software that has been wanting this data, but it should be exciting for everyone at large. And so what does this mean for the end advisor? Because I'm going to a bunch of MGA events. I'm talking to a lot of advisors. You guys could provide that world-class service. There could be so many things that happen if you get the darn data. Automations could trigger to you, to the client, automatically based off policy renewal, based on cash value changes, based on address changes, whatever. If that data is flowing into your CRM or your database automatically, there's so much you can do. Not only that, it trickles down to the client. The client no longer has to call you or wait. The client no longer has to call the carrier and get confused and then call you and get confused, and then you have to go to your MGA, et cetera. It's all in your database at your fingertips. You don't have to worry, which is huge. And so what this means for the industry, if it starts moving, is not only are you going to provide better service, you're also going to sell more. The carriers are going to make more. Clients will be happier. And so this is a big chink in the chain right now. And unfortunately, a lot of people, including myself, for many years just kind of said, oh, this chink is never going to be solved in the chain. And so let's just move on and do the best we can. But there was a lot of light shown at this conference, which was exciting. And for the first time since I've been going, I didn't see a combative approach. I saw everyone understanding that we need to do this. I think a lot of that is just Canadians in general are underinsured. The carriers are feeling some pain as it relates to growth. And so unfortunately, we had to get to this point where they're kind of like, okay, this is an ROI positive initiative because we're not growing. And so we need to make it as easy as possible for advisors to sell our product. And they can't sell our product when we don't sync our product to them. So let's get that done. Then once all the pipes are there and all the infrastructure is there, then we can turn around and say, why aren't you selling enough? But right now, it's hard for us to do that. And so I think that's what's going on. These carriers most of them are publicly traded and they have to prove shareholder value, yada, yada. But we're at that point now where this is an initiative that will be ROI positive. They can trace that and they can do it. Avari has proven it. So really exciting week. I enjoyed it. I'm definitely going to be going again. As always, please like, comment, subscribe. This was kind of a industry update episode. And I look forward to seeing you in the next ones. I'm going to be having guests. All right. Have a good one.